Hi, welcome to the session number 2 with your number 1, Project Management Principles. If I may ask you, what do you understand by the term project? Well, project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Generally, any project will have a start and an end. During the start and the end, there'll be a lot of activities that you carry out in order to accomplish the goals that you have established for your product, service, or result. Every project has 3 ingredients. That essentially means any project that you work on will have 3 basic ingredients that you need to work with. The first thing is every project has an outcome. Example, you might say you're working to produce a car. So that is the product, that is the outcome of your project. The second thing is every project involves resources. Your resources could be people, funds, facilities, or information. Third, every project has a start and end. This means every project has a schedule. It will start on a particular date and it will have to end on a given date. So your knowledge and the competency as a project manager will allow you to plan your project within that given timeline. Estimating the effort, deriving at the duration is an art and a particular skill that you need to gain as a project manager. So when you're working on these 3 ingredients, one thing you must pay your attention is quality. There'll be certain quality standards, quality benchmarks that you have to establish in order to ensure that you deliver the right product the right way. Then, if you look at the term project management, what do you think? What is the need of project management? Now we know what the project is. We know the definition of a project. But if you go further and start asking yourself, why do we need project management? Well, that is an interesting question. Project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities in order to meet or exceed stakeholders' needs and expectations. Project management is a discipline of the organization and managing resources in such a way that the project is completed within defined scope, quality, time, and cost. It's an art. It's a particular discipline that you have to master. Initially, you might struggle, but gradually you will gain the competency and expertise in delivering much complicated projects. When you're working on a project, when you work as a project manager, there are 3 project constraints that you have to pay your attention on. These 3 constraints are also known as the iron triangle. They are namely the cost, scope, and time. Cost is the budget allocated to your for your project. So any project will have the cost factor. So there will be certain cost limitations. There will be a cost allocated for your project. So as a project team, your challenge is to manage within that cost given to you. Of course, it's challenging, but that's an art. That's a special competency that you need to gain as a project manager. The second constraint that we talk about is the scope of the work that is to be delivered. So you need to agree on the scope, saying these are the features, these are the characteristics of what you're going to produce. It's basically going through all the requirements and ensuring that you and your stakeholders agree on the scope of work. This is very crucial because the clients and the stakeholders need to feel that you are delivering the right scope for them. They need to feel that, okay, this is what exactly we need to accomplish. So it's a tricky area, yet during the project management activities, you must work on defining the scope, identifying the scope, and then controlling the scope during the project. The third constraint that we talk about is the time. In a world where we try to do a lot of things, very high profile, high ROI projects, time becomes one of the major constraints. That essentially means when you work on a project, you will need to stick to the timeline that is committed. That is to say, you will start the project on this date and you will end it on this particular day. That can be a certain buffer, but that shouldn't be too big. With the client, you are going to agree on a timeline, basing the time estimations and duration that is derived from the time. So as a project manager, you are accountable in order to ensure that your project is completed within the given time frame. So while you're working on these three constraints, you also must ensure that the quality is met. Every project will have certain quality requirements agreed. Your clients might demand certain quality based on what they want to see at the end. Certain companies also have certain quality benchmarks. That is to say, they have certain quality expectation based on the standards they follow, based on the customer needs, as well as other parameters that they have thought of. In addition to these three constraints and the quality, when you project manage, there are three other things that you have to work on. Number one, risk. During the project, one thing that is certain is that you're going to face a lot of risks. The risks are the issues that have not occurred yet. You foresee certain issues may occur in future. So you need to identify these risks and then come up with the appropriate responses before they occur. If they occur, then you got to work towards a resolution. The second parameter that you need to work on is customer satisfaction. In the traditional project management, there's very little emphasis on the customer satisfaction, true customer satisfaction. So while you're delivering your project, while you're working on these constraints, quality and risk, you got to ensure that your customers are happy about what you have been doing, what you are producing. So for this, you need to have often communications with the client, your stakeholders, and ensure that what you do is what exactly they need. Taking their feedback, constant feedback, adjusting what you do based on their feedback is the primary way of making them happy. So when there are deviations, you got to work towards those deviations and come up with the best response to satisfy them. At the end of the day, if the customers are not happy, what you do might not be so successful. So ensure When you work towards your project implementation, you pay a lot of attention on the customer satisfaction. So if you look at the agile and lean approaches, one of the key focuses of lean and agile is this customer satisfaction. So lean and agile teams do anything and everything to make the customers happy. At the end of the day, this is what matters. More than what exactly you produce, what matters mostly is the fact that the customers are delighted with your service, the product, and the project delivered. If you can tackle that, you'll do great. And even in a challenging situation, you exceed the cost, you exceed the time, you exceed the scope. If you can keep the customers happy through regular feedback, giving the right visibility, allowing them to get involved in what you do, I think that will make your job easier and allows you to have more projects in the future, work towards more serious engagements with the clients. The last thing that I want to talk about under the constraints and the parameters that you have to consider in project management is resources. Resources is one of the major aspects that impact the project success. The resources could be human resources or non-human resources. Managing them is absolutely critical to deliver the projects effectively. So work towards a better management of these three constraints, and then other additional parameters such as risk, customer satisfaction, and resources. Of course, do not overlook the quality aspect. You've got to ensure that you are going to meet the quality standards, the benchmarks that are being established. Let's have a look back at the project management aspect. In this, I'm gonna take you through some of the theories and concepts around the traditional project management and agile project management. First, if you look at traditional project management is quite often province and responsibility of an individual project manager. That is to say, as a project manager, you will be accountable to deliver, hold responsibility for most of the authorities, responsibilities in a project management team. Starting from talking to the stakeholders, gathering requirements, executing the project, monitoring and controlling, closing the project, all these activities are primarily assigned to you as a project manager. So you have a lot of burden, a lot of responsibilities to carry daily basis. In agile project teams, agile project management believes in empirical process control. Empirical process control is based on three pillars that are visibility, inspection, and adaptation. That essentially means in agile teams, the project manager is not the person to commit. The project manager is a servant leader, a facilitator, as well as a coach. The project manager in an agile environment is not a project manager to say so. His term, his designation will be something like Scrum Master, the guy who is facilitating the process and the product related facilities. Generally, agile project teams are self-empowered. That essentially means we want agile teams to work alone towards the project implementation. They of course will be guided but they will not be given micro level information. In comparison to the traditional project teams, agile teams are more energetic. They have a lot of autonomy. They drive what they do rather than just waiting for someone else's instructions and commanding. Project management techniques are used for new projects as well as ongoing projects. So it's important to know that as a project manager, your job might be to work on an existing project and deliver the pending work, or work a brand new project and start planning, work towards successful delivery of that project. So whether you are agile or traditional, the basics remain the same. There will be the iron triangle. There will be customers waiting for what they want to achieve in the project implementation. Now let's have a look at the methodologies used in project management. A methodology tells you what you have to do to manage your projects from start to finish. A methodology would describe every step in the project life cycle in depth, so you know exactly which tasks to complete, when and how. A methodology is a body of practices, procedures, methods, and phases used by those who work in a discipline. A methodology for a project is about managing the project activities. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think you need one specific methodology for your project? Well, the answer to that is easy. As a project manager, you need a project management methodology to steer your projects in the right direction and keep them on track. Of course, there are many methodologies out there. What you pick has to be the one that fits your requirement. That is to say, different methodologies have different focus. They have different way of thinking. They have different way of approaching the project implementation. Whether it's a very critical project where you can plan, where you can foresee what is coming next, or you really don't have a lot of ways of planning for future, you got to pick the right methodology. Certain methodologies will give you a lot of planning tools. Certain methodologies will allow you to approach it the right way with a different approach. So let's have a look at some of these methodologies available in the market and then talk about them. First, SDLC. SDLC stands for Software Development Life Cycle. So this is particularly valid for software development teams. So this has 5 phases that you need to work during your project implementation. Later we are going to discuss them in further, right? Just remember that this is a sequential waterfallish model framework that gives you 5 phases to work on. You may start with initiating the project. After initiating it, you're going to start planning. Once the planning is done, then you start the execution. During the execution, there's a stage called monitoring and controlling. Of course, monitoring and controlling can be done during the planning as well. While you're doing your planning, you can also work towards certain adjustments. The last phase, last process in this particular methodology is closing. So in every phase, you're going to work on certain disciplines, certain knowledge areas that will allow you to deliver the project effectively. The second methodology is Prince 2. Prince 2 is a methodology widely adopted by the European segment. A lot of organizations, project teams in the Europe follow Prince2. There's a reason for that. The Prince2 was started when the UK government had to work on a project delivery. They came up with a set of standards and practices associated with some of the principles and values that they thought right will help them to deliver the project. So they managed to deliver it successfully, and then finally thought, why not we come up with a model and give that to the market? So they came up with Prince. Prince2 is a second version of that. So we are going to discuss Prince2 as well. Generally, we are going to talk about the general concepts, mainly aligning to the PM work. However, in middle of the session, somewhere at the 7th and 8th session, we are going to talk about Prince2, and then we are trying to relate what we have learned so far with Prince2 principles, values, and practices. The third methodology that we list down here is Agile. Mind you, it's not a methodology to say so, but it's a mindset. The industry may call it a framework or a methodology, but it's not a methodology if you look at it carefully. So it's a mindset which allows the project teams and organizations to deliver the projects effectively. Agile claims that when adopted effectively, it will allow you to get to the market as fast as possible, to enhance the quality drastically, and drive the customer satisfaction so easily. When you look at how it works, it is true. It is the tools and techniques, the principles and values provided by Agile mindset sound like they are more credible, they are more useful than the traditional mindset, traditional thinking. Later, we are going to discuss about Agile, and although it's going to be pretty basics, it's going to help you to understand how you could deliver your project using certain Agile mindset. The next thing is a Lean framework. So we are also going to discuss a bit about Lean. However, I understand you would have gone through this as a discipline, this as a project management mindset. So what Lean talks about is primary value optimization and waste reduction. When you work towards a project implementation, your primary focus has to be the clients. We already discussed this. So keeping the clients as your primary focus, what you try to do in Lean is to optimize the value to them, value delivered to your clients. That can be done by optimizing your processes, optimizing your product, ensuring that you eliminate the waste during your processes, during your project execution. This will delight the clients. Lean is very thin process. It's gonna cut down all the unnecessary steps and activities involved in the project delivery. So all in all, we are going to discuss quite a few methodologies during the module. As I mentioned earlier, it's mainly around PMBOK and Prince2. But also we are going to talk about certain Agile concepts and theories, as well as a bit of Lean. Right. So if you ask the question again, why do you need different methods? Right? We all discussed why do you need to pick one specific methodology. Now, if you ask yourself, why do you need different methods? Different situations demand different approaches. That's obvious, isn't it? When teaching to school children and postgraduate students, I won't use the same methods. Obviously, due to the fact that that's not well convincing. Now, if I use the postgraduate teaching methods to teach school children, they might not understand what I'm saying. If I use the techniques used to teach the school children, to teach postgraduate students, they might be offended because the techniques are totally different. So, same way, different methods fit different requirements. Simple and static projects and dynamic and complex projects demand different methods too. Industrial worker and knowledge worker may prefer different approaches. Hope you agree. So if your project is above industrial workers, if your team is consisting of industrial workers, the tools and techniques, the principles and guidelines that you use have to be fit to them. Otherwise, you will distract them. You might not get the best out of what you do. So, picking the right methodology for your requirement is absolutely critical in delivering the projects effectively. All right, so we already spoke about the project management aspect. We learned some of the methodologies available there. Also, we discussed about the need of having different methodologies. Now, let's have a look at one of my favorites. That is to talk about two technical jargons that are widely overlooked by the project management communities. They are anticipation and adaptation. So useful two terms when you understand them properly. The first, anticipation. Traditional product development methods are based on anticipation. That is to say, we tend to anticipate our project related activities. So generally, PMBOK, Prince2, SDLC, the traditional project management methods follow anticipation. That is to say, we anticipate our solutions, we anticipate the schedule, we anticipate the budget, we anticipate the quality, right? So a lot of anticipation is involved in terms of planning. Even during the execution, we need to start anticipating what is happening around us. So generally, anticipation follows three pillars. They are namely defining, designing, and building. Defining is the stage where you look at the requirements and define a solution, define the problem, define the solution. At this stage, your aim is to define everything that is associated with your project implementation. So during the defining stage, you may go through all the requirements that you know, that you need to know in terms of implementing the project, and then define the solution in detail. You may not work towards a proper solution, but mainly you will define the problem specifically. At the end of this particular process, you will have something like a proper requirement documentation that talks about the definition of your problem. That may also talk about bit of the solution that you are trying to implement. So at the end of this stage, defining stage, you start designing the software or the project. There can be various activities that you do in order to define and design the solution. You may come up with a technical architecture. You may design the entire product with conceptual designs, with graphical designs. So that is the second step. The third step is building. So once you have a clear idea about the solution, the design of what you are to implement, the next stage is building. Obviously, during the building, you're gonna test that as well. So define, design, build is basically the way to go. That is if you believe and follow anticipation. The second way of approaching a project delivery is adaptation. So very different to anticipation. Agile methods are based on this adaptation. Adaptation works on three phases as well, but they're different. First one is envision. Second, exploring. Third, adapting. Envisioning is when you have a particular requirement in mind, a vision, product in mind, we envision that particular product idea. For example, I might say I want to create a particular product. So I start envisioning that. I put that down into paper. I draw a mind map. I do a conceptual concept. So at the end of it, I will try to understand the idea that I have in terms of what I want to achieve in my project life cycle. So generally, there'll be a lot of discussions around this. There'll be a lot of brainstorming. There'll be a lot of workshops facilitated in order to get to a point where you understand what exactly you envision in implementing. So when you have a steady idea, when you when you're clear about the vision you have in terms of what you want to do, then you start exploring. Exploring essentially means you start with the basic production work, right? Let's say I want to do a huge product. It may take 2 years, right? So I envision the entire thing that I want at a high level. I really don't have to go into detail. So having a proper idea, a clear idea about what I want to do complete in 2 years time, I can start exploring, right? That is to say, I may prioritize a piece of work leading to that end product and start developing it. While developing, I'm gonna look at what is being produced and then adjust it, right? So exploring is a step where you start trying something. While you're trying, you're gonna look at what is happening, what you are doing, and then the next step is leading to adapt it. So during the exploring stage, two things happens. Actually, three things happens. Visibility of what is happening, right? Everything what you do is visible to everyone around you. That includes your clients, that includes your stakeholders. Once these things are visible to everyone, then one thing happens is inspection. So everyone start looking into what is happening. The inspection allows you to adapt. Let's say something doesn't make the client happy. You do something, you go take it to the client. Client says, I'm not extremely happy about what is being done. Then you seek the feedback, further feedback, asking, okay, what do you think the right thing to happen? You get that feedback, come back and adjust. You adapt your process and the product to the feedback provided by the client. So similarly, inspection and adaptation can happen at any point where you think you see a deviation. So this is an absolutely great approach, risk-free, or I would say very less risk in this approach. That's it. Depending on your requirement, you may work on anticipation or adaptation. It's up to you to pick the right approach for your project implementation. Let's have a look at the waterfall model, right? We already touched base on this, but I want to give you more insight about how it works. Now, when you hear the waterfall, when you see a waterfall, one thing that is obvious to you is that the water falls down, right? Once water falls down, can can the water go back? No. Once it's fallen, it's fallen. Similarly, in this approach, there are multiple stages to run through. When you come from one stage to the another, there's no way for you to go back. Or it's very challenging for you to go back from one stage to the above. So that's why this is known as waterfall. The waterfall approach follows a model called BDUP. BDUP is big design upfront. So it's a waterfall practice where we demand a bigger design at the beginning of the project. Before we start everything, we would like to have the bigger design. Once the bigger design is done, we insist that no changes or minimal changes could occur during the project execution. The second thing that you need to do, understand about the waterfall or traditional approach is, it is predictive approach to development. You try to predict, as we discussed, anticipate the things and plan. So when we do that, we need to keep track of the risks, assumptions, issues, and limitations very carefully, because due to the prediction, due to the anticipation we do, there are a lot of risks around it. There are a lot of issues that may occur. So tackling them is a crucial aspect of delivering the project effectively. So we already discussed that this is relying on the anticipation. That is 3 steps: define, design, and build. Right? So if you look at these 5 stages shown in the diagram on the left, it starts with requirements, requirement specification, requirement gathering, then designing, developing, testing, and releasing. Right? So quite useful model based on your project requirements. Maybe this is the right model to use. All right, so let's have a look at Prince2. It stands for Projects in Controlled Environment, to reflecting that this is the second version of Prince. It was developed by CCTA, which is part of the Office of Government Commerce, which in turn is part of the UK government. So what happened was, when they worked towards a project implementation, they came up with a set of values, principles, and practices that they thought they need to adopt. It became a success. They delivered the project, and then they thought, why not we document it as a set of best practices and make it available for the communities. So that is where Prince was started. The original version of Prince was intended for IT, but the scope expanded, and Prince2 is intended for all types of projects. It's widely used in public and private sector, mainly in the European segment. The original Prince was first published in 1989. This itself was based upon an older methodology from the 1970s. The good thing is there's no licensing fee, as well as it's mainly product focused, process based framework. All project types will be benefited by this, so it's a good thing. Whether you are from IT, non-IT, it doesn't matter. Prince2 works for you. All right, so let's talk about another method, iterative and incremental. Overall life cycle is composed of several iterations in sequence in iterative and incremental methods. So as you see the figure at the bottom of the slide, you see that there are 4 iterations in the diagram. An iteration is a defined time box. Whether it's 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, it's a time box. What we are trying to do within one of these iterations is to produce a mini project, deliver a mini project. So your project, if your project is 1 year, you're not going to wait for the entire year to complete one cycle of delivery. You're gonna divide it to multiple iterations, and during each iteration you are going to get something out. Interesting, isn't it? Each iteration is a mini project composed of activities such as requirement analysis, design, coding, and testing. So every box that you see here, right, you can see everything that you see here is an iteration. In each iteration, you go through the designing, building, and testing. One thing you see here is also, before you start each of these iterations, you work towards 2 more steps prior. They are analyzing and planning. So you need to analyze the requirements and then plan. So what you plan is not for the entire project window. What you plan is just for the iteration coming up. So at the end of the iteration, you deploy your output. You're going to deploy the product, and that will be tested. Based on the testing, you're going to seek feedback, right? You consider these feedbacks together with the requirements you have, then plan for the next iteration. So at the end of every iteration, you have a potentially shippable product. So sometimes you might not deploy it to the production. You might do a release internally, but essentially what needs to happen is there is potentially shippable product. You might not ship it to the users, but it is shippable if needed. At the end of each iteration, release a potentially shippable output is a requirement here, right? Potentially shippable means if needed, you can ship it. You might not ship it every time, every sprint, every iteration, but if needed, you can ship it. Iteration is a subset of a final release. So as you see here, if this is your entire release, each one of these iterations is a sub-release. It contributes towards your final release, right? Final product. So this is a very unique and interesting approach that the project management teams can work towards. That way you can mitigate the risk of delivering the wrong product. You can mitigate the risk of not making the client happy. So this allows you to seek the feedback. So as we discussed, iterative and incremental methods are primarily based on adaptation, right? They support you to work on these 3 pillars, that is envision, explore, and adapt. Finally, let's have a look at 2 terms that you must know as a project management professional. First, BDUF. BDUF stands for Big Design Upfront. The second term that we are going to talk about is MVP. MVP stands for Minimal Viable Product. First, looking at BDAF. BDAF essentially means that you are going to look at your total solution. You're going to look at all the requirements of your project or the product, put them down, and then start detailing them before you start the development. In this process, you will need to understand each and every requirement in detail. If you look at the practices like PMBOK or Prince 2, we try to document the requirements in detail. We list them down with specific formats with a lot of elaboration. The reason is that we are trying to come up with a complete solution for the problem. So the more you understand about the problem, the more accurate solution that you can design. So the idea behind this is to ensure that you anticipate the entire product at the very initial stages of the project development life cycle. And once it's designed, and when you move towards the next step, that is implementing, building, there's very little room. You can go back to your process. You can go back to the previous steps and then start redesigning the products. Therefore, is very crucial for the project teams to understand the requirements perfectly well and come up with a design that we anticipate is the right design for the problem. So this works. The companies, the teams still use this approach, but you need to be extra careful in using this because there's very little room for you to come back once you go from design to building. All right. So the second concepts that we are going to discuss is MVP. That is again minimal viable product. What this means is this: when you work towards a product development or project implementation, you're going to look at the minimal requirement set. How do you know what is minimal? Well, let's take an example. If you think of a house, in the first approach, you will think of each and everything that you need to do before you go and live in the house build. In MVP approach, you would think the minimal requirement set for you to go and live there. That's the difference. So in terms of designing the solution, coming up with the requirements, you try to limit your requirements to meet the minimal requirements. So you're not trying to exceed that because practically what happens is until you get the basics done, until you get the minimal requirements met, you have no way of working towards extra features, the features that can wait. So the concept is built around facilitating the minimal requirements so that we start there, right? That is not to say that is your final goal, but that is to say this is your starting point. This is the very initial version that you can work towards. This concept allows you to get to the market as fast as possible because you are not trying to do everything possible. You're trying to do the minimal requirement set, right? In that minimal requirement set, of course, everything will be must. Everything will have to be developed before you go to the market. Otherwise, it might not be sufficient enough for you to compete with the market to satisfy the clients. Therefore, MVP is a great concept personally, and I have seen this works greatly professionally as well as personally. So let's start thinking of these concepts terms in the future sessions, and let's see how this can help us further for us to become the effective project managers. With that, we are ending this particular video, and up next is process group activities. In that video, we are just going to have a very brief introduction to the processes and activities involved in different process groups. I'll see you there.